Hey everybody, it's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Welcome to the first network webinar of 2021. Really grateful to have you with us. And so I'm going to just yap at you for a quick minute just to make sure we make some space for everybody to come into the Zoom room. You've been in these things before, so you know it takes a minute or two for everybody to make their way in. And today we have about 615 people who signed up for this session with Doug and the team from Hattaway Communications. So a couple quick things just to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you get knocked out, we are going to be pretty much at capacity. So please try not to jump on and jump off. Stick with this if you can, because you might find some difficulty in getting back into the Zoom room. But why don't we go ahead and pick up a practice that we had in, yes, Renee, it is being recorded. And we usually have these things turned around in about 24 hours. But Renee, I'm going to pick on you. If you would, why don't you join me in a habit that we've had at the network now for, gosh, going back to whenever this horrible pandemic began, and that is an idea that we borrowed from Professor Brene Brown down at the University of Houston, and that's this two-word check-in. In 2 words, just describe how you're doing right now. And if you would, maybe Renee and everybody else, also just add your name in and where you're coming in from, what's home or what your workspace looks like for you just now, where you're at. And I'll go ahead, I pre-populated mine. You're gonna be sending that out, by the way, to everyone, or maybe it says in the chat, all panelists and attendees. So go ahead and fire that one away. And as we're waiting for everybody to say hello to one another and be in community, and Susan, you have a question, you can go ahead and toss that into the chat. I'll try to get to it there. But Susan, you've also raised something in raising your hand. If you would, when we have questions, and we'll make some time for that along the way, go ahead. You're seeing that chat function, looks like a big word cloud. Just next to that, at least in mine, is a Q&A box. And that's where we're going to go to look for questions as we move through the presentation. So please make a point of, if you've got questions in there. And hey, Barbara in LA, how are you? You feel optimistic? That's a good way to be. There's a lot of really good news. And I'm seeing a lot of friends and familiar names in here. Hey, Elizabeth Cahill, how are you? Omar, I think I just saw you go by. Natalie, how are you? Going way too fast for me. So I'm going to try to say hi to folks along the way. Dietland, how are you? Jessica, Carrie, Jennifer, Willette, Kira, how are you? Okay, way too fast for me, but suffice to say, as you can tell, a lot of folks with us, and grateful to have all of you, and hopefully everyone's in good health and that you can stay that way, because obviously we all know there's some light at the end of the tunnel, a little bit of time before we all get to where we need to go. So with that, my partner in crime, Tristan Mahabir, is manning the deck. Mr. T, if you would take us forward. And as you're doing that, as we go to this next slide, I'm going to tell you all about this new thing that we built. And really, we was Tanya Barrientos of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Norris West from the Annie Case Foundation, along with a really fantastic team of other folks who are part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work group. We had this notion a couple of years ago that maybe some of the work we were doing was actually getting in the way of some of the goals and aspirations and values that we all hold. So if you go to Com Network DEI, not only will you find a report that shares what we found, what we learned, but also some real practical, tactical tools of how you might change the way you work, how to operationalize your values. So as we're doing this, the other thing, talking about operationalizing your values, we have for the last little while tried to be really mindful of being accessible to as many folks as we can. So if you have need, there is a closed caption button down at the bottom of your screen, or at least that's where it is for me. Click that open. Our friend Alan is going to be keeping up. Everybody else is a slower talker than I am, so hopefully that'll be easier on Alan. But there's closed captioning available should you need it. And also our friend Marva, who you may remember from Com Network V or some of our more recent webinars, Marva will be offering ASL services. So what you might want to do if you should need that is go ahead, if you figured this out how to do it with Zoom, you can pin her camera so you can see her offering interpretation along the way. All right, Mr. T, if you would go ahead and take us forward to the next slide. This is the other thing I just want to flag for everybody. We created a listserv last year in the middle of the pandemic, and because of the extraordinary circumstances we found ourselves in, if you're a longtime network member, you know we used to have a listserv. We put it on ice for a while. We brought it back. The wrinkle is you don't need to be a network member to participate, so that's up and available, and you can find it through that link that you'll see just there, and maybe someone can toss that into the chat so others can find it. Let's move straight along, Mr. T. Other thing I need to tell you, gotten a few emails about this. Is the network going to gather in 2021? Oh, you bet. We are absolutely. We've been planning for this, gosh, even since last year as we were planning for V. We know this. We will gather. What we don't quite know yet is we're going to be able to do that in person, or we're going to have to go back to a virtual model for this year. But either way, Bernie Sanders, at least in spirit, as you can see from that picture, he will be with us, maybe with the mittens. And the dates, if you can put these into your calendar now, October 6th through 8th, and we'll just share as much information as we can happen when we know it. So you know what we know. We're getting together October 6th through 8th. So that's this fall. What that's going to look like, who's going to be with us, what kind of format we're going to be in is all to be determined. So stay tuned. We'll keep you up to date. Mr. T, if you would, bring us forward. Other thing I want to just flag for you is, as many of you know, I think we have now 16 local groups operating around the United States. And so 3 of them are going to be gathering just in the next couple of weeks. So on Friday, I'm going to catch up with Jack Nank and the entire team from Com Network Detroit. They're just doing a real mellow kickback, welcome into the year, bring a cup of coffee. You can join your friends in Michigan and Detroit there. The following, I believe that's the second, I think, is a Tuesday. Our friends in New York, led by Amy Plotch, with the entire leadership team up at Com Network New York, they're all going to be gathering in the morning to talk about that DEI project that we just showed you. We're going to take you through that. And also, so are our friends out in Denver. They're led by Taryn Fort, who's at the Colorado Health Foundation. She's wonderful and assisted by a really fantastic leadership team there. They're going to be gathering on February 17th. So if you're in Colorado or the Mountain West and that's the place you want to check in with, go ahead. These are all free and available to anybody, and as probably won't surprise you to hear, all of these are going to be happening over Zoom. So you can get that detail and the coordinates through comnetwork.org and the local button that you'll see when you arrive there. And also, Carrie was kind enough to put that into the chat for us. All right, I think that's all little updates, and that has everybody that we have with us so far. So let's go ahead, Mr. T. I think it's now time for me to pass this over to Doug Hattaway from the team from Hattaway Communications. So Doug, welcome. Pete, you're going to be taking over the deck. So you're seeing us in the Brady Bunch just for a quick minute, but we're going to remedy that as Pete takes over the deck. I'm going to get out of the way. I'll be back for Q&A, and I'll see you all on the other side. Doug, Carrie, Pete, everybody from the team, thank you so much for being with us. And Doug, why don't you go ahead and take us away?
Thanks, Sean. Hey, everybody. For those who don't know us, Hattaway Communications is a strategic communications firm. We're based in Washington, D.C. and currently scattered all over the place. Our mission is to use strategy, science, and storytelling to help visionary leaders and organizations achieve ambitious goals for people on the planet. That's what we do every day. And around strategy, we draw from communication strategy, marketing, brand strategy, also advocacy and social movement strategies. Science, we pull from the social science and data science. Particularly, we'll talk a little bit about social and cognitive and motivational psychology. And as you all know, the science of storytelling is the way to communicate with people with maximum motivating power. So we do content and campaigns that help people engage their audiences. Members of our team, Pete, let's go to the next slide. Carrie Shum and Pete Untitled will be joining me. Carrie's specialty, and her genius, we like to call it, is sort of linking strategy and creativity and audience engagement. She's going to be talking later about how we're bringing these research tools that we're going to share with you down to earth and create different ways to engage people. Pete is a member of our science team. His background is in linguistics, and he's the guy with the words. And he'll be talking about the methodologies that are behind this research and these insights and ideas we're going to share. Next slide, just a little further background on us. We work with organizations of all different kinds on all different issues across this country, around the world, national, international, and also local level. And narrative change, as you all know, there's lots of ways to talk about narrative and narrative change. And we work with groups using it in different ways at all kinds of different levels, whether it's policy change, movement building. The Lumina Foundation, for example, we're going to share a link to some resources and research we have produced with them on communicating about racial equity and justice in the field of education. We're working with Unidos US, largest civil rights organization, working with Latinos in the US about narrative about that community. So lots of different ways to use this material. I'm going to give you an example from our work with Freedom to Marry and the marriage equality movement. We thought it'd be useful to start here on these two ideas, which are very prominent in the political culture and conversation. And I know on many of your minds right now, the idea of unity, which was the big theme of President Biden's speech, who said, let's start fresh and listen to one another. And the vice president's speaking about American aspiration. And we found in our research that as we talk to people in focus groups across the country, all over the country, people from all different backgrounds and beliefs, we really did hear a sincere yearning for unity in the country. And I think it's important to point out the way President Biden went on to talk about it, I didn't hear him talking about that means we are trying to make nice with, right-wing extremists. What he was talking about, he mentioned that moving the country forward through big challenges over time has happened when we've got enough of us to come together and move the country forward. And I think that's something you'll see as we're sharing ways that you can talk about the causes you care about, issues that you work on, in ways that frame them in fresh ways that will bring more than enough people along to help you move the country forward. And Kamala Harris is such an inspiration as an aspirational figure. Let's talk about, we're going to talk a little more about the science of aspiration that informs what we're thinking. Here's an example of what you're going to find in the workbook that we're making available, where we tested narratives about America, the country itself. We call dominant narratives, ideas that you hear very commonly in the political culture and conversation, and then new narratives. And what we did here was give people a choice. Which do you agree with more? Or you could say neither. This one, we said America is hopelessly divided versus we can be united. When we start listening, which is what the president said, look how people responded. 21% saying we're hopelessly divided, 2/3, 2 out of 3 people in our survey. This was during the home stretch of the election in the fall. So a very contentious time. It has been a very contentious time for a while. There's a real yearning for unity in the country. And this idea of bridging divides was a big part of the ethic and the guiding principles behind this work. Let's go to the next slide, Pete. After that. John Powell is a real thought leader in the space of narrative change for bridge building, and he calls it bridging narratives. And we shared this quote. He was somebody we collaborated with in doing this work, in finding areas of common ground around healing the country, working to a government economy that really is structured to serve people and serve everybody, and devoting our work to questions of who we are, who we aspire to become. We thought that was a very nice way to capture the approach, which was provided, the guiding principles were provided by the Ford Foundation that funded this work at the very beginning to serve organizations that are advancing social justice and in many different ways in the country. And they are the initial funders of this, and this way of thinking really guided us. So to dig into the science quickly on the next slide. If you really want to walk out on the science, this is a article I wrote about it for Stanford Social Innovation Review. We call this approach aspirational communication. I'll get into that in a minute. You can get that article on our website. If you Google this hashtag, you'll see articles and videos and so forth on this topic of aspirational communication. But let's jump to the next slide and really cut to the chase. The big idea here is that to communicate with maximum motivating power and really get people to lean in and see that you're connecting with them and what really matters to them, connect your cause to the aspirations and values of your audience. And we're going to focus on the idea of aspirations. Our aspirations are ideas about the kind of people we want to be, not ready for that one yet, and the kind of world we want to live in. And when you are speaking to that, you're speaking to people's personal sense of purpose and what drives them. So connecting with their authentic aspirations is really important. So go from there, we're going to talk about how we connect that to narrative change. The next slide gets into our example from the marriage equality movement. Here's a dominant narrative, to use our term, that the movement was contending with. This isn't to pick on one of my favorite presidents, but to emphasize that this was a dominant narrative. This is what was dominating the political conversation. So we needed to change, we needed to contend with that. Then looking at the movement, it was framing this issue of same-sex marriage or marriage equality in these terms on the next slide. It, of course, was an issue of civil rights and having equal rights under the law, legal rights and benefits was how it was framed. And we needed to change that in order to build a durable majority beyond what we had at the time. So to do that, we went out with research and asked people, instead of the approach that pollsters make and where they ask, here are 2 sides of a debate, which side do you agree with? We started with the audience and said, when it comes to marriage, what's your aspiration? And the answer is what you see in that headline, love and commitment. is how people talked about their personal aspiration when it came to the topic of marriage. And these same-sex couples looking to get married, that was their aspiration too. So we hit on a shared aspiration. Everybody who cared about this issue could begin to see themselves in that big idea. So we use that literally to frame every communication. And I'll break that down for you. Next slide shows to use ideas like that when you really hit up. So we're not trying, okay. Frame it first with a headline like this. Start with the language that expresses your big idea, and then tell us what we call strategic stories that bring that idea to life through the stories of real people and real situations. That's really the technique that we're talking about. Doing that here helped us achieve narrative change and norms change. Next slide shows how we did that, or what that looked like over time. When the Gallup organization first started surveying this issue in 1996, we had about a quarter of the population supporting legal recognition of same-sex marriages. In 2018, we had hit 67%, and that really ticked up after 2010. We had a really quick, incredible spike in it. You can hit the next bar to show how that number went up over time. We broke 60% in 2015, and it hasn't come down since. So this approach helped the movement achieve what is called durable attitude change at a very large scale. I know a lot of you have heard about that and find that example helpful and as inspiration. What you're gonna see is, go back to the previous image, please. When you go to our website, under the Insights tab, you're gonna see a little form where you can put in your information, which will allow you to download this handbook, which is going to go deeper into the science and into narrative and share insights and ideas that you can use in your work right away. So that's my quick introduction to the approach. I'll turn it over to Pete to start digging further into what you're going to find in this American Aspirations handbook.
Sure thing. Thanks, Doug, and good afternoon, everyone. So as Doug mentioned, through American Aspirations, we're really interested in seeking common ground through exploring cultural narratives. And when we say cultural narratives, what we mean are ideas about people and society, about the way things are and the way things should be, that have been driven into the culture over time and have come over time to become so common that they come to sound like common sense. And because of that, they're often really easy to overlook. It's kind of like the Matrix, where it surrounds all of us. It's the air we breathe. It's just the way that we see the world without us even noticing it. But the minute you are turned on to it, the minute you begin to notice it, you start to see these everywhere. And you start to see how these cultural narratives are guiding our thinking about issues, shaping our perceptions in various ways, and the world starts to look quite different. So through this work, we're trying to help people and organizations frame issues in terms that resonate with Americans across the political spectrum by building on these cultural narratives, and also to create new ones about the kind of country America is and ought to be. And this has its roots in the psychological and social science. The reason that our team is interested in exploring cultural narratives is because narratives help shape our identity, which in turn drives our behavior. They help us articulate our ideals, the kind of people we want to be, shaping our self-image, which can prompt us to act then according to that aspirational identity, to live up to the image that we've created of ourselves. So through this project, we've been exploring over a number of years, dozens of different cultural narratives that you can use to frame communications about a wide range of issues, and that can bring people together across ideological divides, demographic divides, and geographic divides. As a quick example, here's one very powerful idea in the narrative about America, the rugged individual, the self-made man. And when this idea has been so dominant in our discourse for so long, when it's either the only kind of story that people hear about America, or at the very least, the first story that they hear about America, people are more inclined to believe that that's how the country works, that individuals pull themselves up by their bootstraps, make their way through life alone, don't need any help from others. And they're also more likely to believe that that's the way it should be, that America would be better off if only everyone just took responsibility for themselves, or that all you need to do to make it in America is just to work hard. So narratives like these make it harder to advocate for social policies and programs that address income inequality or other forms of inequity in our society, because it conflicts with this fundamental idea of what it means to be an American. And the thing is, you're never going to talk someone out of a meaningful meta-narrative like this. It's too ingrained. So this project has been all about finding alternative narratives that people also hold in their heads, because we all hold multiple narratives about a given topic that sort of compete, finding another narrative and lifting that up instead so it takes primacy, or creating a new one that gives people a new way to look at the world. So as a counterexample, here's an alternative to that idea of the self-made American. So this image obviously tells a very different story. This is people joining forces to build strong communities, working together. And the story it tells about America, the lesson it has is that, no, we don't just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, we work together. We work together in our communities, we work together as a country. That's who we are as people. And the moral of the stories like these drive home the importance of community and social responsibility to our identity as individuals and our identity as Americans, and how it's working together with all of us doing our part for the common good. That's what makes opportunity possible, for us as individuals and for all of us who share the country. And the thing is, both of these ideas represent narratives that both reside in many of our heads. It's not one or the other. And our survey research shown here shows that most Americans want both of these things. 80% of people want a country where people take responsibility for themselves, and almost as many people want a country where people look out for others. So these aren't mutually exclusive, despite them popularly being perceived as being at odds. And there's an opportunity to lift the one on the right up, because the individual narrative on the left is much more dominant in the culture than the collective narrative on the right, because people hear it more often. It's been driven in the culture for decades. It's much bigger, much stronger. It's not a fair fight right now. But someday, by nurturing and lifting up narratives like the one on the right, those too can someday be big and strong, and the fight can be a little fairer. So it's sort of our goal in this project to help put people in a frame of mind to value social responsibility, support social policies and programs that create a more level playing field, by making sure they hear more stories about America that open their eyes to those principles and values. So for a couple minutes, we want to pause and hear from you all now about the negative narratives that you want to disrupt in your work, whatever they may be. We encourage you to give it a little thought and put some ideas in the Q&A section, and we can lift a couple up here for conversation.
You're also welcome to put that into the chat. I'm seeing one from Maria, or Marie, excuse me. Thank you. Others? Jessica, Cindy, see a couple from you. Shanita, Cindy, Marcia, Kayla, Terry, Anthony, Kirsten, thank you. Nick, Mary, Jenny, and Beth, thank you very, very much. Susan. Vanessa and Bob, Seema, Judy, Elizabeth, Allison, Mauricio. Thank you very, very much. Sarah?
Yep, find all kinds of different issues being focused on here. A lot of them kind of boil down to that core of individual versus social that we were tapping into earlier. It's such a foundational narrative that underpins a lot of these issue narratives. I would encourage my colleagues, Carrie and Doug, to call out any as well that are interesting.
Yes, some of these are what we would call issue narratives, like what's the narrative around Social Security. Others are at a higher, what we call, as Pete said, cultural narratives about the country and the way it is, the way it works. A lot of them are about people. There were mentions of narratives about immigrants or narratives about people who are contending with poverty, narratives about older people. And that's often the case, sort of narratives about people, which obviously often fall in the realm of stereotypes, are part of cultural narratives that really get in the way of social progress.
Yeah, and there's a number in here about poverty and austerity, and we actually have an example coming up later where we actually do have data on that, and then show how you can talk about it in ways to reach a wide range of people. So look out for that later on in the presentation.
I notice a number of them too, like what I do won't matter, we can't make a difference, that sort of thing. That is really important, because when we are talking about changing systems, social change, the kind of difficult, hard work it takes to make the kind of change that so many of you are working on, you have to counter that narrative among people who agree with you or agree with your worldview, under believing that they can't really make a difference. That's a really important one to point out. We've found, by the way, in research that back to storytelling is always the most powerful form of communication. The way to counter that is to share stories of successful change happening. I know, like with young people, like the age of my young kids who were too small to really remember being part of the movement that helped elect Barack Obama. And just telling that story opens their eyes to the fact that people can come together and achieve something like that. So that there is, when we're talking about narratives, what are the big ideas? And then what are those strategic stories that bring those ideas to life? They really work together. All right.
All right, should we keep it moving? All right, we'll keep it going, but encourage everyone to continue putting thoughts in the chat. These are really useful. And of course, if you have any questions, you're welcome to follow up with us after this webinar. We'll provide all our contact information so that you'll be able to get in touch. So for more than 5 years now, our team on American Aspirations has been focused on exploring simple but powerful questions like these. We've done that through a couple dozen ethnographic interviews with people across the country. We've done it through dozens of focus groups with people of all demographic and ideological stripes. We've done it through a number of rounds of national surveys. And questions like these about what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of life do you want to live? What kind of country do you want to live in? It's our goal to get beyond political questions or questions about current events to try to get a deeper, more foundational, more multidimensional read on what Americans value and aspire to. And the survey that Doug mentioned earlier, most recently, we fielded a nationally representative survey in fall 2020, asking more than 2,000 American adults across the country about their personal values and goals and about their aspirations for the country. And those questions were drawn from, original qualitative and quantitative research we had done as part of this project, as well as research that's been shared with various research partners throughout this project, as well as psychological studies of motivations, what motivates people, the moral foundations that motivate people, and the personality traits that drive people's behavior. So you'll be seeing some data from that survey right now. So one of the important questions we asked explored the personal values that Americans hold dear. What you're seeing right now is we gave respondents a list of values shown here on the left and asked them to rate on a scale of 0 to 10 how important each is to the way they want to be as a person. And the results shown here show the percentage of Americans who rated each value a 9 or a 10. So what you're seeing is just the people who are saying that, for example, being responsible is extremely important to the way I want to be as a person. And what our team sees here is a lot of unity. For example, very large majorities of Americans agreeing that being responsible is extremely important. And what struck us was not only how widely held these values are down the line, but how even values that are often portrayed as being in conflict are actually held in people's heads simultaneously. Americans want to be self-reliant, but they also want to be compassionate. They want to be loyal, but they also want to be open-minded. So there's a lot of room for unifying values that you can tap into. So we encourage you to kind of look at this list of words and note any that you think might apply to the causes that you work on, to your work. We've used them in the past and others have used them to craft communications that help people see themselves and their own values reflected in what you write and say and show to them to build support for your organization or your cause or whatever it is that you're working on by making sure that it starts from a place that taps into what people hold most dear. Another version of this is exploring people's personal aspirations. So the question structure was the same, giving people a list of personal aspirations here down on the left, drawn from psychology and motivational science, and asking them to rate on a scale of 0 to 10 how important each is to them personally. And again, this chart, same way, shows the percentage of Americans rating each a 9 or a 10. So right at the top, we see a majority of people really prioritizing wanting to enjoy life every day, which resonates with me, certainly. It's certainly become a little more salient for all of us in the last year or so. But looking down the list at the second highest rated aspiration, Nearly 6 out of 10 Americans said that respecting people who are different from them was an extremely important to the way they want to be as people. So that's really something that stood out to us and something that's important to keep in mind these days and really represents an opportunity to reach out and appeal to. Other aspirations here show similar opportunities to bring people together. For example, the third one, inviting people to live by the moral principles they espouse, or to feel a sense of purpose, or to be part of something bigger than themselves. So again, look at this list and note the ones that could speak to your audiences. We're all motivated to act according to our ideal images of ourselves. So by lifting these up, we can encourage people's better angels. But of course, these big ideas, we're also aware, are all buzzwords. They're defined in many different ways by many different people. So our goal is to try to define them in meaningful language that's authentic to people. It's drawn from already what's intuitive and top of mind for how people think about these concepts, that also encourages them to support meaningful change that can make America a better place. As an example, we've done linguistic research on how Americans talk about responsibility, especially social responsibility. And everyone knows the individual responsibility narrative, as we discussed earlier, but we found that very few people have language that they can readily access about social responsibility. In focus groups, we talked to Americans across demographic, geographic, ideological backgrounds about these ideas, including responsibility, including businesses' responsibility to society. And we found that people all across the political spectrum parroted the dominant narrative that business is all about making money. It doesn't mean it's not about being nice to people. It's not about helping the homeless or improving the roads. And this unanimity really stood out to us because this is the narrative that's been driven in the culture. So naturally, that's what first comes to mind for people when you ask them in an open-ended way about this topic. So we used this insight to develop a simple statement to test and counter the dominant pro-business narrative. This is another section of our American Aspirations survey research that Doug introed earlier, where we show people a dominant narrative on an issue. In this case, the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits, alongside a simple, intuitive articulation of a positive counter narrative. In this case, businesses do have responsibilities to their employees, customers, and communities. And we simply ask them to choose which they agree with more, the one on the left, the one on the right, or neither. And what we found on this issue, but also many others, is that even though maybe people haven't heard the one on the right as much, and therefore it's not as top of mind, when they see it in front of them, and when they choose between that one and the dominant narrative, the preferences are very clear. And in this case, the new narrative gets almost 7 times as much support as the dominant narrative. It was actually the best performing narrative of the dozens we tested in the entire survey. So there is something here. There is something here that we can tap into. But to go back to what I said earlier, to become a realistic rival to the dominant narrative, it needs to be nurtured and lifted up and driven strategically and consistently. So with that in mind, how can we take narrative ideas like these and use them to inform your daily work? This is a framing tool we use to drive a new narrative about various topics. It starts by always articulating and being grounded in the meta-narrative idea behind the topic and using that to frame communications about whatever issue you may be working on, as well as the key messages and talking points that you're putting out on a regular basis and the stories you're telling to bring the topic to life. So in this case, the meta-narrative about business responsibility can help frame an issue narrative about one way in which businesses have responsibilities. For example, excuse me, the deck is acting up.
Yeah, Pete, actually, we've been getting a number of comments that it's blurry, so there might be a connection issue.
Oh, apologies.
Tristan, can you take over showing it?
Tristan does have a backup.
Yeah, so we've had that going on in the chat that people are having trouble with.
Apologies, everyone couldn't see.
Yeah, Tristan's doing that now.
Okay.
Okay, maybe it is clear to some people. All right, we'll see. Hopefully this will clear it up for those who've been having a problem. Sorry for those who have. There have been connection issues all over the country this week.
Thanks, Tristan. Just the next slide can populate the whole thing. So our meta narrative is about business responsibility. Our issue narrative that flows from that is about an example of business's responsibility. So in this case, we chose living wages. We can go all the way through this, as well as key messages about the various ways in which living wages are important. For example, good wages can drive economic growth, and the storytelling that brings that to life on the next slide, followed by consistently telling strategic stories and content that bring the issue to life, and literally in this case are keeping the narrative where people can see it in the caption here. So that's just one example of how we can take these meta-narrative ideas and actually use them to drive concrete communications that you're sending out on a daily basis that all tracks back to this place of values and aspirations that make your communications more resonant to people. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Carrie, to talk about how you can take insights about people's values and aspirations and use them to tailor communications to speak to people's unique mindsets. Carrie?
Yeah, thanks. And we've been getting a number of questions in the chat about this very topic. So good thing we put it all in the presentation. And that's the key, right? That's the proof for a survey like this, is not just that it's interesting and it tells you something, but you can take it somewhere. And it immediately starts to be workable for you in the work that you're doing to help you talk to people better. And we always think of communication as not just words, but it's words, images, stories, and that strategic storytelling. How do we pull that all together? And so if you can go to the next slide, one really important part of the survey is the segmentation. Somebody asked about clustering, and there are seven psychographic clusters. All of us fall into one of these. I think you need to click to populate the slide. All of us fit in one of these, and they are segmented by shared values and aspirations. So the people in each of these clusters have certain values in common, they have certain aspirations in common, and those guide the way they live in the world. There are obviously some demographic similarities, some are younger, some are older, that kind of thing. But the key defining characteristic is the shared values and aspirations. And when you know that, and especially, when you see some of these narratives where there is widespread agreement, but to pull people along, you really have to speak to them in the language that they will find most motivating. So here are a couple examples of what these segments look like. If you can go to the next slide. Our benevolent idealists are united by the shared values of responsibility, open-mindedness, and being compassionate. And equally, they are not self-reliant and religious. So they're defined both by where they share and where are the things that really don't drive their behavior. And the shared aspiration here is that they respect people who are different, they really want to make a difference in the world, and they are willing to compromise. It's a very interesting segment, certainly a sort of low-hanging fruit segment for a lot of behavior change campaigns, but they're not the only segment. If you can keep going, they're about 13% of the adult population, and they're really activatable. These are the kind of people that you can start with mobilizing a campaign, really talk about issues in terms of the effect that they will have on people. Then if you go to another one of our segments, which we call God and Country, as you might expect from the name, they are united by the values of being family-oriented, patriotic, and religious, and they don't really see themselves as creative. And the aspirations that join them, really interestingly, the top one is that wanting to live by moral principles and have a sense of purpose. But just like our previous segment, they respect people who are different, and they're open to compromise. So these are not black and white, right? You can already see that there's some places where we can reach both of these segments, but the way we reach them might look a little bit different to really spark what matters most to them. This is a little bit bigger segment. It's about 22% of adults. And really, we can reach them by framing things in terms of those moral and religious principles. That's what's going to cause them to sort of lean in and lead forward. And then you can tap into those shared values of some of these other qualities. And we're going to show you an example of how this could work. And again, this was something somebody had brought up when we looked at living wage. There is very high agreement that jobs should pay a living wage. But the way you talk about that to reach the sort of flashpoints for each of these audiences is a little bit different. So with your benevolent idealists, you talk about living wages so that people can provide for their families. And then with the God and Country, if you can click, you should pay it because it's wrong for people to work full time and not be able to make ends meet. So agreeing with the same meta narrative, but you're tailoring it for the things that each audience will find most salient and most motivating to them based on their shared values and aspirations. If you can go to the next slide, we'll show like what this looks like visually. You know, visual strategy is a really important part of this. So your benevolent idealist, you're showing this family coming together, and then with your God and country, you're showing someone who's sort of wrestling with their paying their bills. So again, matching the language with the image. These are clearly could be part of the same campaign or coming from the same parent organization, but they're telling a unique story to reach these two unique segments a little bit differently. And then finally, if you take it to its ultimate, you know, this is what a social media post. So for your benevolent idealists who want to make a difference and join a cause, we're saying come together. Together we can make a difference and join the movement for living wages. And then if you were trying to speak more directly to your God and country audience, it's stand up, speak out. It's the right thing to do. So you're trying to pull them along, join your program, join your movement, but you're really tapping into what's most motivating for them. You know, there's a lot of talk about authenticity in communication these days. This is how you show authenticity, is that you really deeply understand the people that you're talking to, and that you're speaking to them with language, images, and stories that really map into their motivations, not just try to sell them the thing that you want them to be part of. So to go back, I know this is all summarized. We have all of the 7 segments and a lot of detail about all of them and some ideas in the handbook that, again, you can get from our website. And I think that is we just have want to leave some time for questions.
Wonderful. And we have quite a few. So gang, we invited you to go into the Q&A to share some of your narratives. Now I'm going to invite you to go into that Q&A box, please. And that's where I'm going to be looking. You can also vote for questions to make sure that maybe you have a similar question to somebody else. If you see it, go ahead and vote for it. That'll help us make sure we get to the ones that are most relevant. So let me crack this open, see where we are. I'm going to start down at the bottom, and if you all can start voting, that's great. I saw a really good question from Keith, but I've lost it in here. Here it is. Keith asks, and whoever from Team Hattaway wants to answer this, do you attack sub-narratives, and he acknowledges that may not be the correct term, in the same way as meta-narratives? An example he offers is keeping people in their place with the caste system in America is the meta-narrative, but we focus on debating racism. Doug, do you want to take a swing at that?
Sorry,
I'll read it back to you. Yeah, hang on one quick second.
Response to answer another question. Could you repeat that one?
Oh, sure. Hang on. They're moving by me quickly. But Keith asked about, do we need to attack sub-narratives? And again, he's not sure if that's quite the right language that we should be using, but he says, do you attack sub-narratives, and that may not be the correct term, in the same way as meta-narratives? An example he offers is keeping people in their place with the caste system in America is the meta-narrative, but we focus on debating racism.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a great question, and I wouldn't worry about the categorization of the different levels and types of narrative, because ultimately you're probably going to be contending with a number of big ideas that work together at different levels. As Pete showed, and you'll see in the handbook, we've given you a tool that can help you sort that out around a particular issue that you're working on, and think about, okay, what are higher level narratives that we would call meta narratives, or perhaps cultural narratives that affect this issue. That's really the place to start, and think about what are the other big ideas that either help or hinder making the progress you need to make. So for example, we had a lot of examples early under negative narratives, like changing this is impossible, or it's too hard to change the system, that sort of thing. You might call that a sub-narrative or a related narrative. I definitely put that on the board as, yes, that's something that we need to contend with if we're gonna make this kind of progress that we want to make. So yeah, absolutely. We had talked about there's lots of ways to define narratives and do narrative change. We're giving you a bit of a toolkit to help you begin to sort it out, and think at those multiple levels. So hopefully this will help you start to parse some of that out.
Okay, next couple of questions. We're going to go to Lori's, then Manal's, and gang. I'm picking the questions that have been voted for the most. So Lori's question is, so when we use values and overused words like hardworking to describe people that our programs help, do we also reinforce the negative counter narrative that, quote, some people are lazy or don't want to work?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's come up in a lot of work we've done around programs that help people in poverty. And as you saw, I think and that is always one of the questions, like, how are we doing this? Are we doing this in a way that supports, reinforces a narrative, and lots of times a negative narrative or a dominant narrative? And you do see that a lot, people unintentionally doing that, or you challenging one. We found in work, for example, funded by the Ford Foundation with the goal of getting the general public to support anti-poverty programs, and to counter what is the negative narrative, which would be a stereotype that people are in poverty because they don't work hard, is obviously false. And there's a couple ways to counter that. You can counter it with data that shows that people below the poverty level actually have more than one job often. That's like countering it with a fact. You can counter it with stories of real people who are working in many ways to, even though they're under the poverty level, and get help from anti-poverty programs. So that is a matter of, if you're not challenging that idea with stories and theme and narrative frames like this and data, you're not gonna be challenging the dominant narrative. And what we found here, you saw in asking people about their own aspirations and values, hardworking was one of, like, and that comes out all the time in asking Americans about their self-image and what they value, comes out at the top of the list all the time. So it is an important idea for many, many, many people, that they see themselves that way and they respect others. They see that way. When we talked with folks about what that meant to them in that other research, we saw that people saw work in lots of different ways. The mother who drops off her kid at the Head Start program is doing her job, for example. They saw people making effort and doing things, all kinds of things, as work, as effort, as taking initiative. So that is a theme, because it's a dominant idea and an aspiration. It's something you need to contend with and figure out how to make it work in your context.
Next question comes from our friend Manal, and maybe T, if we could go back, Carrie showed a couple of the slides. I think it was from that Minnesota campaign. So if we go back, there was one that was a side by. Let's sit on this one for a quick minute. Manal asks, should we be reading into the skin color of these photos? If we can only appeal to God and country groups by centering whiteness, we're going to run into other problems. So both a question and a comment there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And choosing your images, I wouldn't read into examples we have here as representative of the segment itself, because as you look at the demographic information about that segment, you will see there are people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds in it. So that's a really good point. And our task when you're communicating is selecting images that are reflecting the particular audience that you're communicating with. But that's a really good point. And others have asked questions about the demographics behind the narratives and behind these segments. You'll see in the handbook, we've given you that information to give you a sense of the range of different racial and ethnic groups or identities that show up within these different segments. And it is an interesting way to, I think that's a really good point, find common ground against what you might consider as a stereotypical God and country person, and surprise people that there's a wide variety of people who share those sorts of aspirations and values.
Our friend Na asks up in Minneapolis, how do you do digital targeting according to psychographic types, rather than, if you were using Facebook, maybe being able to target folks through geography or demography or interest area, right? All the fans of Metallica out there, you can target with an ad on Facebook or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, you can, there are lots of ways to target and lots of ways to buy media, far more than we could, get to in this thing. But I think the key is knowing who you're trying to reach and why you're trying to reach them. I think a really great example is we've been doing a lot of work on the earned income tax credit. And the organization we were working with, when they'd already been doing some outreach, we looked at all their keywords and their imagery, and it was all about tax preparation. And one of the salient facts about the earned income tax credit audience is they are disassociated from the tax system. They aren't generally required to file taxes. So if you're trying to target them by talking about taxes, you're missing them. We changed the imagery to be about things like paying your bills. And we changed the language to be about trying to make ends meet, or looking for your stimulus check, which in the last year has been linked to filing your taxes. And immediately saw people getting pulled through to the resources, because we were thinking the way they thought and targeting the way they were targeting themselves, the way they were framing the issue. And so we were able to, without increasing the spend or changing where we were buying, make a much different much better return by having words and images that matched where the audience was, not the topic we were talking about.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And to my friend Keith down in Atlanta, I'm not hating on Metallica, buddy. Not hating. Well, I think we can all agree Metallica's last couple albums not on par with maybe some of their earlier stuff, but you and I can take that offline. Other questions. Let's go back, if we could. We had a really cool picture of The Rock and a baby. If you can find your way back to that in the deck and fire that up, because I think Doug, you were speaking to this, but I think it's this idea of what is the challenge we're facing when we're trying to disrupt dominant narratives. And that's a really nice kind of just metaphor for the challenge in front of us. Maybe a couple of people were asking, what does impact look like? And maybe that's a nice kind of visual to show folks while we talk about that. Can you pull that one back up? There we go. So the visual gag here, gang, is The Rock and the baby get into a fight. Who wins? I think we probably know, despite how delightful and maybe the baby might be. The Rock probably is going to overpower the baby. For a lot of us, the work we have to do is, well, Doug, I won't put words in your mouth, or Pete. What's our job if we're trying to raise up the baby to eventually take on the Rock?
Yeah, this was a fun way that he talked about a dominant narrative versus a new narrative. Dominant narratives are driven into the culture, usually intentionally. And a lot of the narratives folks are talking about absolutely been part, like this idea of individual responsibility, and it's all about pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, has been driven into our political culture relentlessly for decades. That's a dominant narrative. And you have to counter that, you have to relentlessly drive a counter narrative in the culture as well. And I think that takes a lot of time and effort and a lot of voices. And that's definitely happening on a lot of important fronts, which is great. We're definitely, as you all know, seeing this, and everybody on this webinar is part of driving that sort of change. What a lot of the numbers show in this research we're sharing is that a lot of people in this country are ready for those new narratives, and we have more of a ready audience, which is great news too. So it's a lot of work, but I think the context is there for it.
And then the question, go ahead, Carrie, I'm sorry.
Yeah, when I look at these pictures, the difference I see, in addition to size, is swagger. To Doug's point, there's a lot, people are much more aligned than we think they are, because we're not hearing about them. But if you're out there with memorable messaging that's reaching people, it gives them permission to say, actually, I thought that already, And so I think the more we can have that kind of swagger and courage in our communication, the more you will see people follow it. That's always, you've got your many axes of communication. You've got your message, you've got your resources, and you've got your spokespeople. If you don't have a lot of money, be louder with your message. Take some risks there appropriately, right? You don't want to just be crazy. But I think that's what can be missing, especially knowing when you see some of these numbers that there's a lot. We were not surprised, for example, that Florida passed a $15 minimum wage. We saw it in our American Aspirations data. Most people believe that you should be able to live on a minimum wage.
Next question we got is from our friend Elizabeth up in New York at CERDNA. You mentioned that narratives about uniting and healing the country resonate with audiences. How do you integrate truth and reconciliation, particularly around anti-Black racism, as an essential part of that narrative?
That's a great question, Elizabeth. And I do want to reference work that I had mentioned. There's a lot of great work around like the race class narrative supported by Demos, work we've done with the Lumina Foundation about talking about racial equity and justice. And the way I think about it is about unity with accountability, that we can only move forward when we recognize the barriers that people face, the barriers that people have faced for a long time. And what the research says is be specific about what those barriers are and focus on solving those problems, and having a solutions orientation is an important part of it. Ultimately, the social science says you get past social divides, the quickest path is to bring people together to work in common purpose, which is to say, find a specific barrier to remove, injustice to solve, specific, something you can do and achieve. And that's how it fits into a narrative, I think, of unity, to bring the country together. Let's solve these problems over here. That's how I think of it. And as somebody else spoke to or mentioned earlier in a comment, narrative is about the way we talk about and communicate about big ideas and issues that we need to contend with. But it's the talking part, it's the communicating part. It needs to lead to action. And if you want to drive narrative change, part of it is the action, is the stories we tell about real people coming together to solve these problems. That's part of narrative change. It's not just the messaging level which we've been talking about here. They really go together, obviously. And the messaging is obviously important. But those actions that people take is absolutely critical.
Cindy asks, what's a ballpark estimate of the kinds of resources that you might need to invest in shifting a narrative? So maybe a better way to think is, rather than just dollars, what are some of the essential ingredients to shifting narrative?
I'm putting that ball in Carrie's court.
I had a feeling it was coming my way. I mean, I think you need to have a credible story, right? Is there some belief and proof that you can give people that you have, that there's a reason for the new narrative, that right, that you have an upstart that matches with where people are. I think the other one is knowing who you're trying to reach and what you want them to do. To Doug's point about taking action, it's one thing to just say things, but it's another. I always ask, to what end? You know, how will we know if we did this? And giving yourself a way to measure that and a way for people to engage in it. You know, that's the only way you'll see if what you're doing is working. Do you start to see other people pick it up really naturally? Does it make sense with the kind of outlets and the kind of people you need to work with? I always say when you hit it, the work gets very easy. And you're full of ideas because it just works. And I know that's a little bit of a mushy answer, but I think that's a big part of it. You know, you start to hear people repeat it when you didn't say it to them in the first place.
And the way you can use these sort of these profiles or personas in an organic way, like we did a campaign where we took all the different personas and the content team just made for the same purpose, to drive people to the same action. They created different pieces of content for each persona and put them out there on a regular, consistent basis, and got the most responses around 4 of them. So then they started focusing on that 4. So they were using the whole toolkit and then following their analytics and seeing who responded, and several rose to the top. So they started focusing more effort there. That's something Anthony put a question in too. I wanted to jump to, Sean, about there's overarching negative narratives, but then when you get into different communities, somebody might have used the term sub-narratives before. And are we trying to understand the different psychographic segments within a community before addressing it? I would say I would experiment with all of them. That's what you can do with this toolkit. Go ahead and say, okay, on Monday, I'm going to talk to these, put out content for these 2, and on Tuesday, I'm going to do those, that sort of thing, and try to do your own experimentation. That's the beauty of our channels, is that we can do that at a low cost. And the second one, should we design our messaging to appeal as many as possible? And that is the age-old tension, if you to put it sort of in the marketing framework of the brand idea versus sort of the segmented sales that you do. You kind of want to do both. like Pete showed with the example of trying to reframe the issue of living wages using a big narrative that 2 out of 3 people agree with, that businesses have responsibilities. That's the big idea. Yes, you want to frame around that big idea. And then he showed several ways that you can bring in other themes, images of different people, for example, back to the idea of using imagery, different messages that specific members of your audience would find important, for example, there. And if we pay living wages, that's going to drive economic activity in our community, right? So they definitely work together.
We'll make this the last question. It's always a tough one for those of us in the comms shop. How do you measure narrative shift or measure impact in comms? But in this case, how do you measure narrative shifts? How do you know when things have changed?
I'll give the high level answer and see if Carrie feeling better. There's a couple ways to think about it, because there's what you're communicating, your output measures. Are we getting new narratives out there or not? And then your outcome measures. And those are changes in awareness, attitudes, and actions. So as Carrie will counsel, you always got to start there with who's our audience? What do we need them to know, feel, and do? What are those? We call those your communications objectives. What do they need to know that they don't know? What do they need to be aware of? And you can measure whether they are aware of them or not. And that is going to be some kind of research that you do. Obviously, attitude change is really what a lot of this is about. And then, of course, actions. Ultimately, all this really does need to lead to behaviors that make change possible in the world. So you need to start there with specificity about what awareness, attitudes, and actions you want to see as the way to start measuring them. And then there's lots of qualitative and quantitative tools out there you can use.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way to answer that question is, what did you set out to do in the first place? And so you should always start there, have a goal in mind in the first place. And then there's all all of these things, surveys, focus groups, reach, all of that matters. But the problem is if you set out to change attitudes and you get 100,000 Twitter followers, that's a metric that doesn't match with what you set out to do. So you really have to make sure whatever you're tracking matches with what you set out to do in the first place.
And maybe one other component is just time, right? That it goes back to that baby versus the rock. It takes time to replace or shift narratives. But we know when it happens. Marriage equality, the example that we started with. Massive shift in the narrative around what was possible, starting with where President Obama was and where he was by the time he left office.
And that does begin, as we say, with strategic focus. The thing about narrative and norms change is you feel like you're boiling the ocean, right? You've got to break it down to achievable milestones and realize you're part of a journey, right? You saw the time frame on that data we showed was 1996 to 2018 was that time frame. Again, we got a real shift after 2010 when we changed the political conversation. That was a very specific milestone. Friedman and Mary asked us to help change the narrative that America was not ready for this. And it was part of their political strategy to get more politicians to support their issue, but also part of their legal strategy. They wanted the members of the Supreme Court to believe that America was ready for this. So that was within a 3-month time frame. We broke the news that we'd broken 50% support through a meta-analysis of public opinion data. So that was an example of boiling that part of the ocean that helped move things along. In the article that we mentioned before, which is available on our website, gives you other ways to think about how to focus on your audience through more of an attitudinal or psychological lens.
Well, on behalf of everybody, and we had a lot of folks with us today, Pete and Carrie and Doug, thank you so much. And Marva and Alan, thank you for the support to make this all available to everybody who might want it. For those who are interested in the story that Doug has referenced around Evan Wolfson and the work at Freedom to Marry, Hattaway played an extraordinary role there. We were fortunate enough to have Evan Wolfson, the founder and executive director of Freedom to Marry, join us at V Plus back, I guess, in November, just before Thanksgiving. We just posted those up on the network's YouTube channel. So Carrie, maybe before we go, we can toss a link into our YouTube channel, or you can find it at commnetwork.org, or just Google the Communications Network YouTube, and you'll find that session with Evan. He gave us about an hour of his time and did sort of a deep dive in the strategy, including the communications piece that led to marriage equality, and obviously traces its way all the way back to Stonewall and even before that. But hope you all are safe and well. We'll be back very, very soon with another series of webinars this year. In the meantime, again, just be safe and well. Hopefully you're in line for a shot. If not, just continue to do what you need to do to stay safe and well. And if you need anything at all, we're always on just the other side of an email. So we'll be back very soon. And in the meantime, be well. See you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks.